Today we're going to make this lovely model of a combination lock safe. Completely transparent, door opens, and when we've finished our own copy of it, I'll show you how to open it, how to pick it, how to set the pins in the right place to get it to open. But in the meantime, we have a long journey ahead of us to build this whole thing. So we're going to start sort of from the front back. We'll build the combination lock mechanism first attached to the door. Then we'll mount the door in the front panel, and then we'll build the whole back of the safe, and then we'll attach the front to the back. So this combination lock mechanism is identical to the one that we also have available just as a standalone sort of demonstration combination lock. And the construction sequence is the same. So we're going to start with building the code tumblers. These are engraved 1, 2, and 3. Start with number 1. And we need, so there are a lot of different screws and a lot of different nuts and washers and things, and I'll explain how to distinguish each one as we go along. You'll also get a screw length gauge in the kit, which lets you measure the length of the screws. And as we go along on the screen, we'll put up a caption that shows what length of screw it is that you need at each time. Although sometimes you can just tell from what's available. Another thing to say is that when you get this kit, all the plastic will be covered with a protective film, either a blue plastic or a paper film. It's a good idea to just peel it all off first. We have a special video for how to minimize frustration in peeling acrylic. Just get it all peeled, and then you'll have it ready. And I think it's a good idea also to lay it out, especially the different screws, so that you'll be able to tell, because often the easiest way to tell which is by which ones you have a group of. In particular, you'll find one bag that has all of these nuts. There's 90 nuts and I think 70 of these screws. These are the 5/8 inch screws. Try to keep those separate from all the rest because there's so many of them and they're all the same length in that one bag. The other bag has an array of different screws which you'll want to get sorted so that you can easily find the one you need. Okay, so starting with number 1 code tumbler, we want to find these smaller screws. All the other screws are these thicker number 6 screws. These are the little tiny number 2 screws. And you'll see there's 2 that are the same length, and then there's a shorter one and a longer one. We want the shortest one. And then you'll see these blue washers. They're the only washers that are blue. They're about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch thick. Take one of those and put it on the end of the tiny screw. And then you'll see there are several clear washers. There's 2 that have relatively large holes that go on these screws, and a bunch that have smaller holes that go on these small screws. You want one of the small holed, and they're very thin. They're 1/2 millimeter thick. So you want one of those that goes on the end of this screw, and then it goes into the small hole on the code tumbler. Flip it over and take one of these tiny nuts. Over there we have a whole lot of number 6 nuts. These are tiny little number 2 nuts, which are very hard to pick up. Put one here and just sort of spin it on with your finger and get it going. And then once it's started, use the screwdriver and tighten it in place. You can make it as tight as you can comfortably do with the tiny screwdriver. The wrench is for the larger size nuts. You don't need a wrench for this because it will sort of lock itself into place, and no problem to get it tightened. Okay, that's the first code tumbler. Next, the number 2 code tumbler, again holding it so that the number is right side up, sort of properly facing. Here we want one of the intermediate length screws, one of those 2. Take that, a blue washer, a small holed thin washer, put it on through the hole. And now you may or may not need a second small of these thin washers. The issue is that the thickness of this plastic is fairly variable from one batch to another. So try the washer, and if it seems like, in this case, if we put another one of these thin ones on, there actually wouldn't be room for the nut. So we don't want to use a thin washer here. And it's possible if you get extra thick plastic, you may actually need to use none of the thin washers It just depends on how thick the batch is. You just want to get it so that that these pegs are sticking far enough out. So attach it there and tighten it down, and that's the second code washer. Third one, referring to the pattern here so I get this right. The third one uses the longest screw, and we hold it this way, again number right side up, and we put 2 of the blue washers on together, then one of the thin small hold washers, unless it turns out you don't need it because the plastic is extra thick. I think again we're going to be okay with just this washer with no thin one. And then it's easier to slide it to the edge, pick up the tiny nut. Sometimes it works better to just sort of hold the nut in place and turn the screw, and that will get it to catch. And get that nice and tight. Now we have the third code washer done. Then we have this orange washer, which has a special shape of cutout. And this one we want to hold it this way so that you can imagine it catching something and pulling it in that direction. And we use the last of the intermediate length screws, and it goes straight through. And then on the back side it gets one of these small thin hold washers, or thin small hold washer, 2 of the code tumbler, 2 of the blue washers, and a tiny nut. Get that on and screw it down. Okay, I've got all those. Now we're going to build the wheel pack that holds those 3 tumblers. So take this piece, symmetrical, doesn't matter which way, and we want the second longest screw. This screen will tell you the actual length. It's also a slightly different color. In through the back, set it up like that. And then you'll see there are 3 different kinds of discs, actually 4 kinds if you count these. Thick, large, thin, small, and very thin, small. We'll start with the large intermediate thickness, so it's 3 millimeter, about 1/8 of an inch. One of them goes on there. Then a small 3 millimeter washer goes on there, and then one of the very thin. These are 0.5 millimeter. They're flexible. These, by the way, also need to be peeled. If it looks at all milky, the film on these is not colored. It's sort of just a milky film. But if it's not crystal clear, it needs to be peeled. So that very thin washer goes on there. Then we have these odd-looking things. You see how they're sort of wavy? They've been kinked. Sometimes they're too kinked. You actually want to sort of straighten them out a little bit so that they're just wavy, not too kinked. If they're too kinked, you'll find too much friction, and we can fix that later if it happens. But you just want these sort of just wavy. They're designed to produce a consistent amount of friction in the rotation of these wheels. Okay, so then we put that, and it goes over around the 2 inner washers. Okay, now I want to take code wheel number 1. The bottom is the back, upwards is the front, so we want the numbers visible here. Set this on there. Then we take one of the thick, very thick, large washers, and it goes on here. And you see if we squeeze this together, put some pressure there, you'll see this disc can turn, but it has just a little bit of resistance to turning. It doesn't need to be much, just enough so that it won't sort of fall or move on its own. If it seems like it's too little, kink the washer a bit more. If it seems like it's too much, flatten the washer out some. Okay, I got that. Now we take another one of the 3 millimeter small discs, another one of the very thin flexible discs, goes on there, another one of these wavy friction washers, there, and then the number 2 code wheel, number legible right side up, in there, and then the second very thick disc goes in there, and we just keep going. So another 3mm disc, another very thin disc, another one of the wavy washers, the number 3 code disc goes on there, and then the 3mm thinner of the large discs goes on there, and then one of the many number 6 nuts. Put that on there. Now we can tighten this with a screwdriver, and we really want to get this quite tight, so we take the wrench and holding sort of all the pieces, just tighten this, not as tight as you can, but just, tight. And then check that these all turn reasonably freely, so this is good. They should not move on their own, and they have to move independently. That's what the discs in between are for. And check that the pegs all touch each other, so that if you turn one, it will pick up the next one as it's going around. Okay, so we've now finished this code pack. Now we can start from the opposite end, the dial. So, starting with the knob, these are sometimes wedge-shaped a little bit, not perfectly square. That's fine. Knobs are often like that. I think you want to put the larger diameter end towards the dial, generally speaking. So you'll use this length of screw. This length of screw. Again, we'll put up the correct numbers on the screen, so you can use the screw length gauge to pick the right screw. Goes first through the knurled knob, then through the dial, and then we have one washer that, you see all the other washers are different lengths. They're all the same diameter, but this one is a bit bigger. Take the one that's a bit bigger. We take this disc. This is the same size of disc that was in there, the smaller size, 3mm thick. That goes on next. Then the slightly larger than normal washer goes there. And then one of these two very thin washers that has the larger hole, not the tiny ones that we were using earlier, but the one that will fit over that screw. Okay, that we set aside for a second. And then we find the door. So this is going to be the door of the safe. It will swing open this way. These set of holes here need to go on the bottom, and this oval shape goes on the left. So holding it like that and holding this goes down this way. You don't want to tip that because everything will fall apart. So we tip the door down onto this, it goes through that hole. And if we hold the screw, we can see that this on the left, these on the bottom, dial from the front. And of course make sure that the numbers are, you don't have the dial reversed. That would be bad. Okay, let's set this down again. Now we take the last of these 3mm discs that are this size, stick that on there, and then this orange disc goes on with the peg part sticking up. And if you built this right, you'll see this thing in this orientation with the longer slope on the right. And then we get another one of these nuts from far away, number 6 nut, and spin that on. Now this also wants to be quite tight, so we'll first tighten it with a screwdriver as tight as we can, and then go back. In this case, so if you look at the wrench, it has kind of a sharpish edge here, and then a slightly more rounded edge here. I like to put the rounded edge towards the plastic because I feel it's less likely to scratch. The other thing we want to do, and this is a little bit subtle, is with this oriented the way it's going to be, put the 0 on where that hole is, and then while you still can, rotate this so that this notch is vertical when that's on 0. If you don't do that, everything will still work. It's just the combination will be shifted from the numbers that it was intended to. Okay, now use the wrench to really tighten this down, quite tight. We don't want this slipping. And it's now free to spin like this. Okay, so now we've built that part and this part, and now we need to bring them together, which is done with these two parts. So they go, you see there's this little knobby part here. That goes down and towards the front in this orientation here. And the way these are attached is using a nut which slides in. Actually, the best thing is to put them on this part first. So nut sliding in the other side, the side away from where the knob is, and then with the knob facing down, it goes into the slot. So you see we have the nut here, the knob is away from this back plate. This is on the same side as the code wheels. Pull this together and then use one of there's a set of 6 shortest screws. These are 1/2-inch screws. It goes through there and tighten it into the nut, and it pulls it together. You don't want to over tighten these, they might crack. So that pulls that joint together. Now I do the same thing on the other side. Get a nut, put it in. Now when you're putting it through the slot here, it has to be with the sides parallel. If you try to put it in the wide way, it won't go. Sometimes these fit very tightly, and if you're having trouble getting it to go in even with the sides parallel, try it from the other side. Often it's looser on one side than the other. So get it through that. Put this in here again with the little knob thing away from this. Another 1/2-inch screw. And stick that in there. Get it tight, but not too tight. And now it's time, these are going to go together like this. But before we put them together, we want to take this washer here. So there's actually 3 different lengths. There's 9mm or 3/8, a 1/4-inch 6mm, and 1/8-inch 3mm. We want the 3mm one, and just set it on top of that screw. This screw sticks a little bit out from the nut. Set the washer on top, and you see this screw also sticks out a little bit. And so we want to bring these together in such a way that the washer is trapped between the 2 ends of those screws. And with it trapped there, then get those tabs all aligned. And now if you just keep pressure on this whole thing will hold itself together. And now we need to get the nuts and screws in there. So take a nut. You notice how I've got my finger underneath there so it doesn't fall out. Stick it in there. Sometimes they'll slide and actually stay there firmly on their own, which is great. This one is loose, so I'm keeping my finger there. Stick the screw through and tighten it, then get it nice and tight. Now flip it over and repeat on the other side. And put this screw in here. Okay, we've now completely built this part of the mechanism, and it will stand up. Now we need to build the latch and the gate and the fence and all that stuff. Okay, we're now going to build the rest of the parts attached to the door here, and we'll do that with the door standing on its own as it does. It's at a slight angle, which is fine. So, first we find there's these pieces over here. They all have the same set of 4 holes. These are shorter, have notches. Take the big one, the extra space on here, and we're going to attach it on the front side, the same side as the dial, with the extra width sticking out beyond the edge of the door. And we're using, there's a group of 4 screws all the same length. We'll put the length up so you can measure it with the screw length gauge. And put all 4 of those through there. Flip it back here. Now we take one of these and put it so that the oval notch there lines up with the oval notch in the main part of the door, and work it through all 4 of these screws. If they try to go out, just push them back in again. Okay. Now we're going to get to the same point up here. So we need 2 of these 5/8 inch screws, the ones that there was a huge number of that you kept separate. Most of them we'll use later, but we need 2 of them right now. Those go in these 2 oddly placed holes above the dial. Let's put them in there. And then there's these 2 quite odd shapes. They go with the straight piece to the left. And holding the screws in place, slide it on there. And next, this orange piece with a little tongue. Oops. Slide that on. Now, it's going to fall off, so I'll tell you what, we'll just put that one on a little bit later. That's okay. Okay, so next, we're going to take these are very thick pieces. They have rounded edges, so they go, top one goes with the rounded edges up. It slides on here, and this one rounded edges down. So basically the rounded edges are on the outside. We'll just put that on later. That's okay. We'll get back to it. Put that there, and now we need this screw. Put up the length of it, and we need this very strangely shaped green thing and the blue thing, which is the latch. We take the longest screw, the very longest screw that it comes with, stick it through in this way so that it'll be sticking out. Get a nut and spin the nut all the way on. And then we want to tighten it. And here you really want to be careful not to break, like don't hold it back here and tighten it. Hold it right up here and get it tight, but don't be cautious of that spot. Okay, so now this gets put together with the blue in front of the green. This screw, one of the, so there's 3 of these washers left, 2 the same length and 1 longer one. We want to take one of the 2 the same length. These are about 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters thick. Goes through this larger hole into this, then the other of the 6 millimeter ones, and then a nut on here. Actually, I guess it's not really attached, so we could have just built it this way. Get that tightened down. Okay, now get this ready, and we're going to put this in here, hold it in place, and put this piece over it like that. So this may or may not hold itself. If not, keep a finger on it. And we need 4 of these nuts from back here. So we'll get 1 nut on here. nuts on the end of all 4 of these screws. And then tighten it with a screwdriver. One of the reasons for having this tiny screwdriver is that about the right tightness is as tight as you can make it with a tiny screwdriver. If you're using a big screwdriver, be careful because you may over tighten it and crack something. So at this point you want to check that this slides smoothly. If it's not sliding smoothly, it may be because these thick spacers in between are too thin. The thickness of this plastic varies from batch to batch, and we include some 1/2 millimeter spacers that are the same shape as these. Almost never is this a problem, but in case it is, if this doesn't slide smoothly, you may have to take it apart and put one of those spacers in, and then it will slide smoothly. Hardly ever a problem. Okay, now let's go back to this disaster area up there. In retrospect, it actually would have been smart not to put these screws in at all. Used to do this a different way. So this odd-shaped piece, straight thing on the back, and it goes behind the green part, and put the 2 screws through. And you may want to just pick this up and keep a finger on there to keep it out of the way. Take this funny orange-shaped thing, put that on there with the tongue sticking out towards the latch. Then this thin, it's flexible, it's thin material goes on next. And then the second one of these pieces goes on here, trapping the green piece in between. And then we put 2 of these nuts on. Okay, and tighten it. Okay, so this is basically the combination lock mechanism. Just one more thing, which is to add the rubber band. This is a very frustrating operation. You'll get it eventually. So we take the rubber band, we want to hook it on this little green hook. So we have to get it behind the green part and around that. And then the other end hooks onto that little knob there. Stretch it so it's about halfway. Bring the other end of the rubber band down and hook it there. So we now have that providing some downwards pressure. So this is now fully operational. This is basically the standalone combination lock kit. And we'll show how you do it later, but in the meantime, since we're here on the back, we can just cheat and adjust the things, get it all together, and just make sure that that works. That should all operate smoothly. Okay, now we can finish building basically the front panel of the safe, which we take. So we'll need these parts. So there's 2 orange sort of plates like this, and there's 2 identical clear thinner plates. We want to take, let's see, from this side. Oh, and then there's the hinges also, very important hinges. So we're going to attach this, and 2 hinges to this side using this length of screw, which we'll put up on the screen. So take one of the hinges, all 4 hinge parts are identical. Screw goes through the front of the hinge, into this hole on the sort of dial side. Then one of these thinner clear plates goes on here, and then the wider of the 2 orange plates, it goes on in this way so that it's sticking out past the end of the door. And then you may as well stick a washer or nut on here, just loose. And then we do it again with another hinge through here, and just kind of wiggle these things so it goes through all those plates. And a nut. Okay, now we want to tighten these just finger tight, enough so that the hinge parts stay but can still easily move, because we'll need to adjust those, and we'll tighten those later. Okay, now to finish getting the door ready, we are going to take these remaining short 1/2-inch screws and put it this way. So you'll notice that these holes are sort of oval, they're elongated here. We want those on the right-hand side, and the 2 round holes on the left. Put this 1/2-inch screw through there, and then the thin plate and the smaller the orange plates. These are symmetrical, doesn't matter which way they go. And a nut. Get a nut on here, another screw on the bottom, and a nut. Okay, and this one you can tighten all the way, so we'll use the screwdriver to get that all the way tight. Okay, and now we attach the hinge blocks here, which will use these large number of identical screws here. Goes through there, through the elongated hole, and put a nut on it. And again, just finger tight at this point. Next one, through the hinge, through the oval hole, and put a nut on it. Okay, so this is ready to go. We're not actually going to attach the door to the front panel until we've completely finished the rest of the safe. The very last thing we'll do is set that in there and drop the pins in that hold it in place, which is not unlike the way that a real safe would be built. Okay, we're now ready to continue on to build the box of the safe, except for one thing that we forgot, which is no problem, we can fix it. We forgot to put the dial indicator on. So that's done using this screw. I'll show you the length on the screen. Goes through the green pointer thing, and then the longest 3/8 or 9mm washer goes on there, and that goes into the hole here on the right side of the dial. And then we take a nut and turn that on from the back. Get it to start. If you ever get too frustrated with a nut like that, just take the screwdriver from the other side, hold the nut in place, and turn the screw till it's started. Okay, now we'll turn that to point straight horizontally like that, and tighten it like that. Okay, now we are ready to move on to the second part of the construction, which is to build the box part of the safe. Sweep this aside, don't need that anymore. And that is done using all of these pieces. So these are the sides, like that. These are the top and bottom, and this is the back. Now, first thing we do is spend a long time putting brackets onto the side pieces. So let's see, we'll organize this. That's going to be holding the hinges on. We'll bring all the nuts forward, and all of these screws. These are all the same. I'll come forward here. And then we've got several different types of pieces of plastic here. We have these L-shaped pieces. We have these short, straight pieces here. And then we have a whole lot of these little blocks with holes. And we have these that are sort of little, very stubby L's. The reason for all these pieces here is that they make very strong corners. It's kind of painful to put them together, but long strong corners. All these are the same. You don't necessarily have to watch the whole video. I'm going to do them all and ramble on about random topics. You can follow along or just watch the first couple and then skip ahead. So, all the screws are the same. We take 3 screws, put them through one of the 3 corners, and flip it over. Then one of these, they're slightly rectangular, so they're wider than tall. I'm going to put them this way, and the longer direction goes parallel here to the edge, and this here should be flush. If it's like this, it sticks out, then that's wrong. You want it flush there. Okay, then one of the little stubby L's goes in there, and another one of these, this time oriented along that edge. And then one of these guys goes on top there. And 3 nuts, one after the other. Now, we're not going to tighten anything with a screwdriver until everything is completely put together. Or I should say, maybe we will use a screwdriver, but we're just going to just snug them up, just enough so that these don't rotate freely, but we still need everything to be able to slide around right up to the very end. And when we're finished, we'll tighten everything one after the other. Okay, so that's 1. There's a total of 8, 4 on each panel. So here we go. We'll move on to the next one. 3 screws, 2 blocks, L shape, bigger L shape, and 3 nuts. Like I said, the reason for this type of corner is strength. We saw earlier on this piece, we saw this sort of T-nut. That's a very common way that people use to connect acrylic, laser cut acrylic at right angles. That's a simple method, but it's not nearly as strong. If you try to put a lot of force on that, it will easily crack the acrylic and it can slide and whatever. This method is really quite solid. It has the virtue that you can make all the pieces with a laser cutter. Now, if we had an injection molding machine, we would be able to make this in a possibly more elegant, although not necessarily more attractive way. 2 of those, 1 of those, and an L-shaped piece. Spin that on. All this preparation will mean that when it's time to actually put the box together, things will go fairly fast. Get that finger tight. Oops. Okay, you can put these in any order. If you get bored putting in one order, you can put them in another order. Oh, so here's an example of one where the core has not popped out. Just take the screwdriver and pop out the little bit that doesn't belong. 2 of those. 1 of these. Believe it or not, this kit has 90 of these nuts and 70 of these screws. It's by far the largest number of nuts in any of our kits. Okay, we've put on half the corners. Set that aside and keep going. Have any little bits of blue plastic left over. Now is the time to fix it before you put everything together. They're all just little cores that I'm popping out with the screws when I push them in. That nut's not wanting to go on easily, so I'm going to get this one on so it doesn't fall out, and then just use the screwdriver to back this up and get it started there, but not tighten it appreciably. Okay, 2 more to go. Okay, last corner. Okay, hooray, we've got all 8 corners. Now we can move on to the exciting advanced topic of sides. They are done the same way as the corners, except there's only 2 parts. Same screws, same nuts, same blocks, same everything, and we've got 4 of them to do on these 2 pieces. So we put 2 screws through, same blocks here, 2 blocks, again oriented with a long edge parallel there, and then one of these little 2-hole bridges, and screw the nut on. Again, just finger tight. Second one. In there. This one. See, we are slowly working through the pile of screws. Run out of things to say, so I'm just building here. Okay, now these 2 sides are completely finished. Set them over here because we've still got to put on 4 more straight sides. These for the top and the bottom. So same as before, all the same parts. It seems never ending, but look, the pile is slowly getting smaller. Okay. There. Now all the parts are ready for their final assembly phase. Okay, now we can begin the exciting process of actually assembling everything that we've been preparing. So we'll let's see, move these to the side and start with the back panel of the safe. And start by attaching the back to one of the sides. Now basically what we're going to be doing is putting screws through here and then through the channels that are formed by the gaps in these blocks and into a nut. The trick is holding the nut in place. So we want to hold the nut with a flat part right up against the plastic and level, just flat here. If it's tipped at all, then the screw won't catch. So get the nut in place. The first one is by far the most awkward because you have to kind of hold everything at the same time, the nut and the screw. You're tempted to put the screw through first, but that actually makes it harder. Get the nut held in place first, and then push the screw down. But don't, if you push the screw down, it'll tilt the nut and then it won't catch. So instead, just start screwing in there and it caught. And now that edge is made. It's correct that this is overhanging here. The back panel is longer, it sticks out. You'll see why in a minute. Okay, now the next one is slightly less awkward. We again hold the nut in place, flat against the bracket and all the way against the back, and turn the screw before pushing and it will catch. Very good. And third nut on this side. It certainly is nice that you can see through this. That really helps. And screw. Catches. Okay. Now we can flip it around and we'll start with the next side panel. Now you can actually rest it and it kind of sits here. That's nice. So set the nut there. Again, it's overhanging here. That's correct. And get it to start. And notice I'm not tightening these. I'm just getting it to the point where it's snug, but not at all tight. Everything will get tightened at the very end. Washer there, or nut there. This thing through. Another nut. Okay, now we've got both sides. And now we can do, at this point it's completely symmetrical, so we can, it's top or the bottom, just depends. Set that on top. You see how it fits in with that overhang. That's why it was overhanging there. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screws to put in here. Start with the one on the back. This one goes in from the back and onto the nut there. And the others come down from the top. So, the back ones. Okay, we got that one. And okay, we got that one. Trick is holding the nut flat. That way it can catch. And yes, it took me a while before I was able to get these. It will take you longer the first few times to get these things to go together. Okay. Flip it over. And the other top or bottom. not want to be doing this if I couldn't see through the sides. That would be a lot harder. If at any point the plastic appears to not be coming together, get this nut started, I'll explain. If there's ever a gap here where it just will not press together, that's because one of these blocks has become rotated, and so you'll then just need to loosen it a little bit and get it rotated properly. All these joints should be completely tight. Okay, now we have the whole box finished, and we can now attach the front panel. So it's going to go with the hinges on the outside and that orange thing on the inside. Just goes right there. And this is actually surprisingly not the most awkward thing to do, because you actually have plenty of room to reach inside, and you can see exactly what you're doing. That nut goes on there, screw goes through. I hope you're able to see. And it just catches and screws in. Okay, we got that one. Now, do one here on the corner. There's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 screws to put in here. Last screw here. Okay. Now, just when you think we're ready to do something exciting, the next thing we need to do is tighten everything, because we put this together. It's actually quite sturdy, but all these screws are still loose. So what we want to do is, going one corner or side at a time, go through and first make sure that all the screws are snug, but don't actually tighten them. Just make sure that all the pieces are pulled together the way they should be. Then once you've done that, then you can actually firmly tighten every one of the screws. You may have to reach around and hold the nut for some of them. And you want to make these basically as tight as you can using the tiny screwdriver. If you decide to bring your own bigger full-size screwdriver, then don't go overboard. So first snug, and then really tighten. feel free to skip ahead in the video if you don't want to watch me tighten all the screws. I'm going to sort of go systematically top down on each side. It's a little bit like when you're tightening screws, let's say lug nuts around a wheel, where you always want to first snug them all down, and then I'm going to do the bottom layer last. And then go in a star pattern where you tighten first one, and then the one that's sort of most diagonally opposite a little bit, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more, until you're finally, after 3 or 4 times around, actually tightening them up to the necessary torque. And that's because that's how you avoid warping the metal, or getting it sort of tighter in one place than you should be able to if it were tight everywhere else. You sort of ease it all together. This we're doing for a slightly different reason. It's to get all the plastic parts aligned right first, before tightening them to the point where they wouldn't be able to shift if they needed to when it's finally getting tightened all the way. I don't remember if I did this one yet or not. The rest of the way. Okay. Now this one. Now flip it over, and all we have left to do is what's on the top. It's tempting to fully tighten all the screws the first time, and that won't do anything terrible, but it just might end up with some stressed or warped plastic. Okay, just 2 more to go. Last corner. Okay. There, finally. Now we're ready for the exciting part. So I'm going to finger tighten these hinges. They should still be able to move easily. And we need this last set of longer screws and the 2 nuts that are different from all the other nuts. These are lock nuts. They have a little piece of plastic in there, and they're thicker. And that thing has fallen down again. Okay. Now, actually, to do this, yes, we don't need to, well, it's probably easiest if we cheat, get the all the things lined up, and actually pull back the bolt so that we'll be able to set it in there. And that's, in fact, what we're going to do. We're going to set the door in place behind the hinges, and it will not fall through. You can just press it in there. And then we put these pins down through the two parts of each hinge, and we put the lock nuts on the end of these pins. And just, you don't want to actually make this tight. This pin is actually meant to be loose, and the lock nut just ensures that it doesn't rattle off. If you want to, you can use the wrench to hold the nut and tighten it to the point where it's quite firmly in there. But again, don't tighten it to where it's actually clamping those two hinges together or the hinge won't work. Let's get this. Okay. So now the door is in here, but the door is all wobbly. Everything is loose. That's good, because we need the holes here, remember the holes that are holding the hinges here actually are ovals, so they're able to slide. And that's so that we can get it tuned up to close very cleanly without scraping either side. To do that adjusting, once it's here in place, the first thing we do is tighten the two screws in the door a little bit more than they were before. Not really tight yet, but enough so that those hinges are kind of held a little bit more firmly, and tighten these a little bit more firmly so that they don't just slide around. And you close it, and see it doesn't close well. So we want to push this back. If it's not moving, then loosen the screw a little bit, and if it's slopping around, tighten a little bit. But get it to the point where, now it still needs this one needs to come this way a little bit to raise the door up. And you should fairly easily be able to get it so that it just, both of them need to move back. Get it to the point where the door is not scraping on the bottom or the top or this side. It just swings in place cleanly like that. Perfect. And now we go back and tighten these as hard as we can. All four of those screws, get them nice and tight. Okay, and check again that the door closes. And then we're almost finished. The finishing touch, turn upside down, and your kit will come with 4 little rubber feet. So put those right at the corner. That way the screws won't scratch up your table, if it isn't already too late for that. Put them on, and there you go, finished safe. Now there's a couple of interesting things to note about this safe. So first of all, to close it, you go like that, and I'm not going to mess up the combination, so I can still open it. At this point, you might think, well, I can easily break into the safe just by knocking the pins out. And in fact, in many real safes, it's very easy to knock the pins out of the hinges. The hinges are completely on the outside, easily either cut off or knocked out. But that doesn't matter, because this orange piece back here is illustrating the fact that all safes will have something which reaches behind. If you see, when the door opens, this plate swings out, but when the door closes, it swings behind the front panel. So if I were to take the hinges off, it would get me nowhere, because you still couldn't pull it out. This plate here, the orange plate here, would prevent it from being pulled forward, the same way as the latch on this side prevents it from being pulled forward. In a real safe, the door is always beveled like this, so that it definitely can't go in. This one, actually, if you took the hinges completely off, could fall in backwards, but that's because it's just a model. So a proper safe will always have this on the back, because it basically costs nothing. It's just a shape that wedges its way in. This safe is held only at the left and right sides. A better quality safe would have a mechanism that actually drives pins up and down, often multiple pins, and sometimes pins in this direction also to get even more leverage. Or if you have a round door, it'll drive pins in all directions. The point being that the hinges are not part of the security of the safe. They're just to hold the door when it's open. They don't contribute to the difficulty of getting the door off if you haven't opened it. So, now, how do we get into this lock if I mess it up? If I spin this dial a few times, now it doesn't open anymore. No matter what I do, it doesn't open. So to open it, you have to enter the combination. If you know the combination, you can do it blind. You can do it, obviously in a real safe, you dial the correct numbers. With this safe, if you don't know the combination, and I don't know what it is actually, you can figure it out by watching the numbers. You can open it by looking in the back, and you do that by, let's make sure this is oriented so we can see it properly in the camera. So by convention, you start typically by turning counterclockwise to the left, and you have to turn, this is just sort of arbitrarily messed up like this, you have to turn 3 times, because the first time the peg on the outside connected to the dial picks up that first code dial, then it picks up the second one, then it picks up the third one, and only after the third complete revolution to the left are you sure that you're actually turning the innermost code dial. And keep turning until the notch, it's called the gate, is underneath the horizontal screw, which is called the fence. Once you get there, you stop, now you turn the other direction. Now you have to turn twice around. The first time picks up the first wheel, the second time picks up the second wheel, and then you go till you get the second one underneath the fence, which happens to be at 90, because 90 is the second number of the combination. And you turn back the other way. This time you only have to turn once to pick up the outermost wheel. And now you see you've got all 3 of those gates under the fence, but nothing has happened yet because we have to go back one more time until the orange wheel, the special notch in the orange wheel, comes underneath, and it has this little hook that picks up the latch and pulls it open. So, there you go. Now, how would you pick this lock if you couldn't see inside and you didn't know the combination? You might think that you would pick it by feeling a very small click or something when the fence goes underneath, or when the gate goes underneath that fence there, that screw. But if I get this at just the right angle, the fact is that the wheel is not touching the screw. The screw has been lifted up above the height of the wheel at the time that those notches go underneath. So you absolutely can't feel anything when those gates go underneath. There is simply no feeling. It can be done. It is possible to pick these, but it's extraordinarily difficult, and it involves being able to sense what you can feel, which is the click between these 2 spots, where the orange wheel on the left or right side is touching the fence. And the distance, the number of tick marks between those 2 touches will very slightly decrease when the fence has one of the gates underneath it, because there will be some mechanical imperfection that allows it to drop a little bit lower, and therefore makes this gap a little bit smaller. But we're talking about by tenths of a division here, or less, a very, very small amount. And there are ways in which this can be defeated, or it can be made more difficult by having what are called false gates, which are sort of depressions that make you think that there's a gate underneath there, but it's actually not deep enough to let it open. And there's even mechanisms where this tick here, this click back and forth, you don't feel it because there's a sort of a smooth sliding mechanism. And those, frankly, I don't know if there's any way to pick them. It gets sort of to the point where you might as well just blow the whole vault up or something. Okay, well, there you go. So now you have a completely transparent, fully functional combination lock safe. I think one of our most attractive models.